But it seemed to me that that more of us had what the idea of a calling versus a vocation. And we had a calling that was different than the way things are at the moment.
You mentioned staffing. As I recall, when you were speaker, you'd mentioned was it Steve Stockmeyer?
No, well, that was when I was a minority leader the first time. My total staff was one person. And then out of 37 people, we had 9 secretaries. Now, when Kowalski became speaker, and I'm very fond of Kowalski, he was backed by the UAW, but basically he was a pretty much of a free enterprise UAW guy.
That's interesting.
Yeah, he was a very interesting man. He and I were very fond of each other. He had a staff of about 4 or 6, and then when we had a tie in the next time around, 55-55, we agreed that the staff would remain the same, except that the speaker would just get a little extra commensurate with his administrative duties, but not commensurate with his legislative responsibilities. You separate the two. Okay. So the staffs would be the same vis-a-vis legislative and policy, but because of the administration, the speaker would get a little bit more.
Which tie was that? Apparently there was another tie. There was
another tie with Don Piers. No, that was when Josephine Hunsinger decided to have a hysterectomy. I said, this is when Josephine Hunsinger organized the house in her maiden form bra. And so, by not showing up, and they didn't want to be there. They didn't want to be speaker.
They didn't want control?
They didn't want to control, no.
Okay.
It's a lot easier if you're in the minority. They didn't want it. So the next time around, well, we had a little majority. But we got clobbered in the 64 apportionment. Absolutely clobbered by the Austin Kleiner plan, and we came out with only 37 in 64.
So then you were the minority leader?
Yeah.
And Kowalski was speaker?
Right. Okay. And Bobby Traxler was majority. The minority leader in those days was the minority leader, the minority floor leader, the minority janitor, the minority whatever. They did just about everything. And I worked my butt off. I really worked harder as minority leader than I've ever worked in my life. And it paid off.
Well, I don't want to skip too fast. I don't want to go by CON-CON, because that was obviously a very, very important time in the state's history.
Time.
Yes, and the leadership. I've just got some of the names from some of the key participants at CON-CON that I wanted to run by you also. But how was the legislature viewing CON-CON?
Well, I can't be anything but subjective about that. I viewed it extremely positively. Some of them, I suppose, the natural inclination is to be negative about something, but I don't think so. I think that, you see, Michigan had 150 to 160 different agencies that were almost impossible to follow. It was a sort of a weak governorship. The legislature was pretty powerful, and yet it didn't meet all that long during the year and didn't follow through. The legislature wasn't too strong, but stronger. The executive wasn't strong enough. The judiciary was okay, I guess. But the theory of the new Constitution was to have an organization where the executive was strong, the legislature was strong, and they had an auditor general that was appointed by the legislature, which gave the legislature the wherewithal for really intensive oversight. And we had a provision in there to get everything down to 20 departments so that it could be followed. And the theme was responsibility and accountability. And I think basically people were in favor of that. In the real fun in the legislature after the Constitution passed was implementing this thing. They had a lot of stuff that was tough to do, like getting rid of the JPs. That was one of the hardest things. It doesn't sound hard, but it was damn hard to get rid of the JPs, and a few things like that. And but one of the things that the legislature knew wouldn't work, and George Romney was a little bit too idealistic about this, and that was apportionment. He thought that you could have an equal number of people appointed by their respective political parties come to an agreement, and that's just totally impossible. And we knew that, and it didn't work, and everything went to the courts.
And it has subsequently. It seems like every reapportionment plan is ultimately decided by the courts.
Decided by T. John Lazinski or somebody like that. And so and that's not a good system. I think what a lot of people in Michigan don't understand, I'm going to give myself a bouquet, because Tom Ford introduced a bill that would set up the counties. I think I've told you this, haven't I? They would set up the counties in exactly the same way as the state, which would mean that you'd have lawsuits all over the place. And they would all go to the courts would be deciding what the county commission districts would be.
Oh, okay.
When that would be a litigious disaster. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So I looked at that, I said, this isn't going to work, and I drafted something that would work, and that was an odd number of county officials drawing a map, and the only justiciable issue would be whether it's constitutional or not. If it's unconstitutional, he had to go back to the political group, and they could get another try at it and not give the judges anything. That sounded pretty good to me, and I went to Marv Stempian, who was this was when I was minority leader, I believe, yes. I met the Marv Stempian, and he agreed that the system that was in the bill itself was just totally unworkable. And he and I co-sponsored our amendment, and was perfectly okay with Tom Ford. He thought it was much better. And that thing sailed through the legislature, was signed by the governor, and we haven't had boo one, I don't think, on counties, have we, Bob? And that thing runs smoothly. And who gets any credit for that? Stempian? No. Waldron? No. Ford? No. Well, they all deserve a lot of credit for it.
Absolutely.
But this is just one of those things that you do on a day-by-day basis if you have a calling, rather than wetting your finger to the political wind.
Let me mention some of the folks that were prominent in CONCON. Glenn Allen, Dick Austin,
Yeah.
Malcolm Dade, who
Yeah.
served in Detroit City Council, I
Right.
believe, for years. Tom Downs,
Right.
Jack Faxon, Senator
Right.
Faxon, Bill Ford, who was
Right,
one of
went to
Michigan's
Congress.
longest-serving congressmen. Morris Hood Sr.,
But Bill Ford was also in the state senate.
Morris Hood Sr., Weldon Yeager, and
Yeah.
Coleman Young.
Yeah.
What a who's who of political leaders for the next couple of
The
decades.
CONCON, you left out quite a few, as you know, but the CONCON is, as Bobby knows, has been one of my prime examples of why term limits is okay, because this was one of the finest legislative bodies that I have in my political memory, and these guys went in there with the experience that they had in life, not as a staffer or anything like that, but as presidents of college, businessmen, former governors, and Glenn Allen, former mayors, and various other things. And they went in there as a body, and they put this Constitution together, and they did it extremely well. Now, and they were willing to do it. They were willing to sacrifice their time for the good of the state of Michigan for a limited period of time, and I think that's what term limits are all about. And I think one of the things that we don't get, that we haven't gotten yet with term limits, is the quality of legislator who can walk into that place and feel at home immediately.